Indeed. Okay, let's get started for everyone, not to waste any time. So welcome to this Conference of States Parties side event, co-organized by EASPD, the European Commission, ANCOR, Keystone International, and Inclusion International. The topic of today will be about improving independent living, improving support jobs. So the right to living independently is of course a right, but to be able to achieve it and to implement it in practice, for at least for some people, you need a range of different types of support services, both on let's say with our American partners, but also here in Europe. We have major staff shortages. We are struggling to find and recruit enough staff who are able to perform the job that is done. But at the same time, we're also struggling to make sure they are sufficiently trained to be able to provide services in line with human rights principles. So that's a little bit the context of the discussion today. And what we would like to explore a little bit further is what can we do practically to maybe diminish the staff shortages, to improve the attractiveness of the jobs, and to make sure that we can actually implement the right to live independently and active in the community too. So let's start straight off. First of all, we have, for those who need it, we also have closed captioning. So at the bottom of your screen, if you click the button More, you should see closed captioning, in which case you can activate it to make sure that you can follow this way too. We will have two rounds in this session. A first round where we will be asking the panelists a variety of questions. And then after this first round, we will open up to participants who may want to come in with a question or a comment or two. The two rounds, firstly, let's say closed panel amongst panelists, and then we will open up to other people too. So if you have any questions, please keep them for now, and then I will bring you in afterwards. Please also make sure that you are muted if you are not speaking, so in order to have a smooth conversation today. So I will start with our first speaker, Donna Martin. You work for ANCOR. So first of all, if you could introduce a little bit who ANCOR is. I think it's important for the many who don't know who you are. Is it possible to introduce ANCOR, Donna?
Absolutely. ANCOR is a national association for IDD service providers. We represent over 2,000 members across the country, and we focus on governmental advocacy, both with Congress and with our administration. We provide educational supports and development for member organizations and their staff. And yeah, that's basically who we are. Do you want me to just jump in, Thomas, or?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it'd be interesting for us to know, at least in Europe, do you have staff shortages? How are you dealing with the staff shortages, and how is it affecting the transitions to community-based services that you need to do?
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, first, I want to thank EAPSD for focusing on this issue. At ANCOR, we hear from our members on a daily basis about how they are struggling with the workforce crisis. To help sort of quantify this, for each of the past 3 years, ANCOR has surveyed its members to assess the state of the direct support workforce across the U.S. The data that I'm going to share with you today reflects our 2022 survey report. So in the summer of 22, we fielded a survey of our members and received 718 responses from across the United States. There are 5 data points that I want to talk about this morning, and the first of which is that as part of that survey, 83% of providers reported that they're turning away new referrals. So that means that more than 8 in 10 reported that they had turned away referrals or had stopped accepting new referrals altogether due to insufficient staffing. And as high as that number is, it represents nearly a 26% increase since the beginning of the pandemic. The impact is that a limited number of available providers has left people with significant or complex support needs without services, or is forcing the individual, forcing their families to travel long distances outside of their communities, assuming they're able to find a provider at all. This reality can heighten their risk of institutionalization or unnecessary hospitalization. The second data point is regarding the discontinuation of programs and services, to which 63% of our members said that they have discontinued a program in its entirety or a service line due to insufficient staffing. And that represents just a staggering 85.5% increase since the beginning of the pandemic. Now, the impact we see here with programs and services closing at a markedly increased rate is the ability for states to maintain an adequate network of community providers and meet federal access standards. This is a requirement for states to participate in the Medicaid program, which is the program that helps to fund services at the state level. And if states cannot meet these adequacy provisions, they're at risk for that funding. And the reduced availability of services certainly jeopardizes the safety and well-being of people who rely on them. Similarly, 55% of providers said that they are considering additional service discontinuations. So the first number, the number I just gave you, reflects services that have already closed. In addition to that, about half of the respondents said that they are considering additional closures. They attribute that to the current rate of high turnover and ongoing vacancy rates, long-term vacancies in staff positions. And another 37% of the respondents said it was just too soon to tell if they would need to close additional services. So you can see how that number can really balloon going forward. The impact to this data point is that while the infrastructure of service is deteriorating and the lack of adequate staffing grows, we find that nearly 700,000 people remain on waiting lists for home and community-based services. Without providers available to deliver the necessary and highly sought-after supports, families will remain unable to access services even after they're removed from the waiting list. And I want to talk for just a minute, a little bit about that waiting list issue. Essentially, what's happening is in many states, the state will find a person eligible for service and take them off the list. And in some states, those lists exceed 10,000 people. But even though the person has come off the waiting list, they may not be able to find a provider at all because, as we said, many are not taking new referrals. And even if they do find a provider, many are not able to get the level of support they want or are qualified for, and they remain underserved. Now, to one of the most staggering data points, 92% of our members that responded to the survey said they are struggling to achieve quality standards. We are extremely concerned that this staggering percentage of respondents said they were having this difficulty due to insufficient staffing. And this number represents a 33% increase since the beginning of the pandemic. The impact that we see here is when providers are unable to fill open jobs and become reliant on pandemic-related emergency flexibilities. They're forced to simply meet a person's basic needs. All the activities that ensure quality services and the necessary support for a person to have a full and rich life in the community, such as access to friends and family, to employment, to recreation and religious service, all of that is lost. And when providers are in a position of just meeting very basic care needs. And lastly, we asked providers what they anticipate will happen following the end of the public health emergency declaration in the US. And 66% said that they're very concerned that vacancy and turnover rates will increase as the emergency funding for wages and regulatory flexibilities come to an end. And that impact is present now. The U.S. Public Health Emergency Declaration ended on May 11th, and providers are facing devastating fiscal and operational cliffs as these temporary funding and flexibilities expire. They've been reliant on these provisions to meet basic operations and report that they do not know what they will do without that relief, without that emergency relief. So in closing, I just want to share that Anchor plans to field this survey again this summer. And we're very concerned to see what the data will tell us about the state of the direct support workforce crisis. We'll likely issue another brief following the analysis of that survey data, and we'll make that available publicly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donna, for, I think, a very clear, although dour, analysis of the situation in the United States. I will now move on to Javier Güemes. You are Vice President of EASPD. Could you maybe first introduce EASPD to participants? Because I know we have quite a few international participants today.
Hello, Thomas. Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. Yes, I'm Javier Güemes. I'm Vice President of the EASPD. Well, EASPD is an umbrella organization. It's the European Association of Service Providers for Persons with Disabilities. We are an umbrella organization representing 20,000 service providers all around Europe, Europe, the whole continent. It is an organization that really manages to really represent the whole continent, not just in front of the European Union institutions, but also the Council of Europe and also the United Nations. Definitely we would like, after our, let's say, activities, obviously try the full implementation of the convention, but also through the provision of high quality and user-centered services. In many ways, we need also to develop accountability, efficiency, and effective ways of providing those services in order to be enablers for persons with disabilities and their rights. So we also, and this is linked to my presentation, try to work for better conditions and lifelong learning opportunities for staff employed in the services, in social services for persons with disabilities in Europe. So having said that, I have seen that Thomas has already put our website in the chat. So please feel free to go there and get more information about the EASPD. Well, I was very impressed by the previous presentation and the quality. This report really is very interesting, and definitely we'll need to analyze it very carefully also from the perspective of Europe. For us in EASPD, when we are just tackling some of the different problems and shortages in training and also in staff developments inside the European Union and the rest of Europe, we are taking the CRPD also as a reference. The convention for us is an obligation for the services, definitely, but it is also an opportunity. It's an opportunity because the CRPD offers the possibility to social services to become really more advanced in many areas of the economic sectors inside the social economy. For example, we also try to link the way in which structural processes like aging, like the development of the social economy services really requires, like for example, the long-term care, really requires a new approach from the CRPD perspective. The CRPD perspective will offer the opportunity to many service providers to really modernize their services in order to be more efficient in the aims and the goals to really promote human rights of persons with disabilities in Europe. The potential is clear because 1.6 million new jobs in Europe will be created in long-term care by 2050. This means 60,000 employments a year. In many cases, most of the part of these jobs will be created in care and support for older persons. So this means that 1 in 6 vacancies in the European Union are in the long-term care. But the problem is that often all these job opportunities are not being met. And we have some staff shortages in our services. When we try to understand why this is happening, we try to find some of the reasons that will require our attention at European level, but also at global level. For example, we know that salaries in the long-term care are 21% below the EU average wage. We also know that sometimes working conditions and working times, the lack of career paths are also some of the main elements that really refrain many professionals to get involved in our sector. And also, one of the main problems that all services face when we are trying to find all these type of reasons that are impacting our services is the difficulties to retain staff in the main services that we provide in the European Union and all over Europe. So how can we address those promises, those problems that we are having in our sector? First of all, for us, there is a top priority, which means that we need to improve the attractiveness of the jobs in the social sector. We need obviously to think about the salary conditions. They should be improved. We need to think also about the working conditions, because until we don't look at them, we will not find really proper solutions for the problems that we are facing. Sometimes there are some unexplored areas to make things better. For example, attractive jobs from a content perspective. Or sometimes working in the social field is also linked to impact, to meaningful, whereas we find that in many areas of our sectors, jobs still are too bureaucratic, rigid, and have limited positive impact on the lives of people. So from the ESPD, we have formulated a hypothesis here. And we would like to invite all of you to explore it together, because we need to explore that the service providers that are delivering on the UN CRPD and that are providing person-centered and community-based services are also creating more attractive jobs and have less difficulties in recruiting and retaining their staff, which are, as you remember, some of the main problems that I have highlighted at the beginning. So in short, rather than being a barrier to attractive jobs, the UN CRPD could be one of the key elements to create some kind of jobs that could be attractive for professionals in the sector. So how can we make this, let's say, happening? Because working in an empowering form of support services is probably a more attractive job than working in a residential institution. The positive and the direct impact that this could have in people's life is really obvious, apart from really joining one of the main demands to go to the end of my presentation, where I was just saying before we were cut off, that really the CRPD is an approach for us that really makes us possible to really explore new solutions to find the problems for the attractiveness of the jobs in the area of social services in Europe. So working in empowering forms of support services, working to support a service in a modern and human rights-based values, having CRPD jobs linked to a more diverse and complex jobs, developing partnerships, belonging, citizenship, community development. And obviously, we have also explored that in many ways, CRPD also tend to have a more bottom-up and empowering approaches to staff and be able to respond the individual needs and choices and wishes. Well, all that makes the CRPD as an enormous propelling force to change the way in which the jobs that are really offered in the area of social services for persons with disabilities can be enormously attractive for all those professionals that are really looking for providing a meaning to their way in which they develop their professional lives. In this area, we also try to explore some initial evidence that CRPD-driven services providers also tend to be healthier and more successful organizations. They even enhance their capacity to have better relationships with public authorities, better access to funding, and they are also even better to prioritize the ways in their funds really are used. So still we are in a way, because the evidence is growing. Little by little, we really find more cases, we really find more knowledge about how the CRPD is really being a fact of a driver for better quality and attractive jobs. But of course, we need to still explore and do a kind of self-assessment of our services, because still we need to get a really view on how salaries are built, how really the conditions are also built. And we need to create also some larger partnerships with other stakeholders, with the public services, with private services, with NGOs, with DPOs. Really, we need to convince the whole ecosystem that we need to explore better ways in which the services can be provided in line with the CRPD. Sometimes change can create some fears, sometimes change can create some uncertainties for the future, but definitely when we're speaking about the staff retention, staff conditions, CRPD can be really a way. I will stop here, and obviously, Thomas, I'm available for the discussion that we'll have after the presentation of my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Javier. I think a clear message there in terms of at least a hypothesis that we will look into more, that the UN Convention and the human rights approach, it can actually help to create more attractive jobs for people coming into the sector. Now let's move to a direct service provider, in some ways, a large organization active internationally too, Keystone International. Genevieve, can you introduce quickly Keystone to us, and then tell us a little bit about what you're doing globally speaking to address some of the challenges related to workforce issues and so forth. Genevieve, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thomas. So I am a white woman with dark brown hair. I'm wearing a black blazer and I have a necklace on with some small beads. It's my honor to be able to join all of you today and fellow panelists, and thank you to EASPD for this invitation to speak. So Keystone is a nonprofit human services provider that was founded in 1972 in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in the United States, on the idea that no one should have to live in an institution. And our very first services were helping people move out of Harrisburg State Hospital and building community-based alternatives. And we continue to develop, to provide innovative, sustainable community-based supports for people with intellectual disability, autism, psychosocial disability. We're providing services in 4 states in the United States. And as Thomas indicated, that we are also operating locally owned NGOs, locally led NGOs in the Republic of Moldova and in India, where our teams are not only providing services, but also helping to develop new and inclusive programs and sustainable service systems. So we're helping to end institutionalization. We provide consultation and technical assistance to governments on inclusive policies and legal frameworks. We employ and advocate for disability rights and inclusive practices. And our work has always been about supporting people to direct their own lives, to establish home, to find meaningful work, pursue education along their peers, and develop real relationships, and to fill valued roles within the community. And to the point of today, none of this is possible to do well without good supports. Direct support professionals are critical to our mission, and they make all of the difference in someone's life in many ways about whether they are truly included and truly belong. But for all of the reasons that we've heard touched on today, there are indeed challenges related not only to staff shortages, but also to a well-prepared and well-supported workforce. So I wanted to just share a few things with us today about the several things that we're doing at Keystone to address these challenges. So I'll start briefly just touching on our team at Keystone Moldova. So in Moldova, over the past 15 to 20 years, the team have designed, developed, and demonstrated several new types of community-based services while helping hundreds of people move out of institutions and preventing thousands from ever having to enter in the first place. And this has included supported and independent living, shared living, personal assistance services, mobile teams, hotline services, vocational services and supports, inclusive education, and creating a critical space and resources needed for self-advocacy to develop and grow as a strong force in the country. And with the support of development partners, civil society, the strong partnership with the government of the Republic of Moldova, through local and national authorities, we've managed to support the development of a complex social services system that was previously almost absent, and including all the necessary frameworks to sustain these services. And central to this has been the development of training and education programs based on rights-based approaches in line with the CRPD, which Moldova has ratified, and on social role valorization theory. And this has also been then connected with social work departments and university tracts. And importantly, we've leveraged grant funds to start services, but we've always required that government would take on the running costs because of, as you all know, this is not work to be done on a charity basis, that government needs to be responsible for their own citizens. That has always been central. But we train and prepare support professionals, and we conduct continuing education. And although the salaries are low, that impacts the ability to retain good people in these jobs. We have sometimes supplemented salaries with grant funds at times, but we know that's not a sustainable approach. So we continue to advocate. And we have found that the biggest impact on job retention has truly been the hard efforts that we've put in on changing mindsets, societal, community mindsets around people with disability, and people working to support them. So if we have time later, I'll elaborate on a bit about how that process looked. So let me move ahead to India. In India, there's not really been a formal way in which direct support practitioner work exists as a profession. Needed supports are often provided by family or by domestic workers, and sometimes NGOs that provide supports, or even in institutional or congregate settings, and workers are not trained well at all about rights or inclusion. So to take a first step in addressing this gap, our team has developed a national training for direct support practitioners. And this is a train-the-trainer model, so we're hoping to be able to have this really spread. Historically, supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to have and live full, meaningful lives with informed choices has not always been honored. That's not only the case in India, as you all know, but that's true in India as well. It is in really all of our countries. Direct service staff were often expected to be passive caretakers, since individuals with disabilities were mostly not seen beyond their disabilities seen as life-defining. And so we've introduced this comprehensive training course intended to really try and impact and change some of the ways these traditional ways of thinking have existed, and to create highly competent and sensitive direct support professionals who can see people and support people with disabilities to lead full and meaningful lives. And I had some more I wanted to say about this, but I'm going to skip ahead since we lost a bit of time. That really the long-term goal is to help create a respected direct support profession in India, and to make sure that direct support professionals who work alongside people with disability realize their full potential, feel respected, and understand the huge value that their work does and gives back. So in the United States, you've heard already today from some of our panelists about the situation for direct support professionals in the US, in Europe. At Keystone, we have deep professional training and continuing education through our internal education teams and through external partners, but nevertheless, we also experience the high turnover, vacancy rates. We have seen some impacts from being able to raise wages, and we continue to advocate at the highest levels and everywhere that we can for additional increases. But in our highly regulated systems, direct support professionals often get caught in that protector caregiver role that I know so many of you are familiar about, because all the regulations and compliances and the focus on liabilities and risk mitigation get in our way of truly being able to support people's inclusion. And so that inertia that sometimes we feel in trying to figure out how to get through this morass of all of the compliances. So I mentioned earlier about the importance of mindset. And one of the exciting initiatives that's really helping us to move things forward at Keystone is to figure new ways that we can together elevate the role of direct support professional. And that is relying heavily on the Listen, Include, Respect guidelines, which were launched last year at the United Nations at this convention, the Conference of States Parties on the Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And this is an important set of global guidelines that Inclusion International and Down Syndrome International, with support from self-advocate leaders from 100 countries around the world, helped to develop. And I won't go into detail about that, but there is a website that I'll drop into the chat after where you can read more about these guidelines. But we're exploring in this collaboration really how these standards can impact the work of an organization that provides direct support. The guidelines were developed for any type of organization, but we really wanted to fold them into our own work. And groups of direct support professionals and service users are being trained by self-advocate experts on human rights. So we're asking the questions about what happens when we truly apply an inclusive methodology and rights-based approach intentionally and in partnership with disability activists and advocates and leaders. How do we empower direct support professionals? And really all of us, we're all support professionals in this field, to step more fully into our role as partners and advocates for inclusion rather than caregivers. And so we're partnering closely with people with disability in this work. And next week at our June summit at Keystone in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, we're inviting people to come and find out what we're learning together and to discuss some of the challenges we're facing, to explore how these guidelines can help us all move forward. So truly, there are some things we can't control, but we can control how we see people and how we define roles and expectations, and that makes all the difference. And so I hope to get a chance to talk with you more at the end of this. I'm going to pause there and turn it back over to you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Genevieve. Also to Keystone International, which has been acting sort of as a bridge for us to the United States, to North America over the last few years, and trying developing our relationships there, but also for your excellent work in Moldova. For those who have not seen it in the chat, we would, to avoid what happened a few minutes ago, please don't click on any links that are in the chat box. We will send to you relevant links that we intend to put into the chat box by email afterwards, but please don't click on any links that you receive in the chat box to avoid the issues that we had going on there. Okay, thank you very much, Genevieve. Of course, when we're talking about support services, when we're talking about the transformation of services, we're not doing it for ourselves, we're doing it to better support people with disabilities, including people with intellectual disabilities. And therefore, we thought it was very useful to try and get the perspective of Inclusion International. Anna McQuarrie, I hope I pronounced it correctly. You joined us this morning from Inclusion International. Could you tell us a little bit about who you are as Inclusion International? And also, how do you see this discussion? What impact do you feel staff shortages have on the implementation of the convention, and what solutions there could be? Anna?
Great. Thank you, Thomas. Thanks for the question and the opportunity to be here and be part of this conversation. As mentioned, I'm here speaking on behalf of Inclusion International, and Inclusion International is the global network of people with intellectual disabilities and their families. We have about 200 members in about 115 countries and are focused on supporting and advancing the full rights and inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities and their families. And this is a really important question and a really important conversation for all of us, and especially for people with intellectual disabilities and their families, who so often are at the heart of being the ones who are in need of service provision. And staff shortages absolutely is a legitimate challenge. It also is used often as an excuse for inaction. So both of those things can be happening at the same time. And I think a really important piece that Inclusion International has been focusing on as we close institutions, as we're building inclusive communities, is that we have to change our thinking, not just about what we do or what services we're providing, but how we are providing those and how we do the work that we do. there's been some really great comments so far about, how to better support people in the support profession, better support service providers. Appreciated the shout out on the Listen, Include, Respect guidelines. And there is a really necessary element of training and a huge culture shift that needs to happen when we're looking at supporting people to live effectively in their communities. And there's a big level of community development that needs to be looked at through this lens. And we need to think differently about how we organize our communities and how people participate in their communities. As highlighted in the CRPD committee deinstitutionalization guidelines that Inclusion International was strongly involved in, support comes in many ways. There's peer support, there's circles of support, and support that's linked to existing services and networks in the community. In Nova Scotia, where I live now, which is a province in Canada, we're in the process of building a human rights remedy in response to a finding of systemic discrimination. And this is a big part of that. It's closing institutions and it's not just about closing doors, it's about building where people are going to be living. And a big focus that we've used is this local area coordination practice that is, some of you might be familiar with it in Western Australia or parts of the UK. And a big piece of that is about thinking locally, thinking typical, and building on what's there and building those relationships in communities. As already mentioned, Inclusion International and Down Syndrome International collaborated on the Listen, Include, Respect guidelines. 350 organizations in 100 countries consulted. And really, people with intellectual disability told us that poor support is a key barrier for them. And people with intellectual disabilities felt they had to put up with poor support or controlling support because so few other options were available. So the guidelines set out to provide an explanation of what good support looks like and how it enables people to feel confident, make their own choices, and participate alongside other people. And I think a lot of that gets back to having control in our lives. And Javier had talked about the convention and using that as a guideline. And a lot of that is about how do we help individuals build the life that they want. And a lot of that, where you do have funding structures, can get into, I often say, all roads lead to individualized funding of how are we supporting people to use funding that's available to build the life they want. And then that changes a bit of a dynamic as well with service providers and changes the opportunities. And I think getting into, again, some of the pieces that have been raised about making more attractive jobs that aren't so caught up in regulations and are focused really on external pressures as opposed to what does this person need and how do we build that? So training absolutely is part of it. Professionalization so that people feel that they're empowered to see themselves as an advocate alongside the person that they're supporting. They see themselves as an agent of change. And I think that piece around building inclusive communities is really important so that we're looking at what is in the community and how are we building those opportunities so that people are more naturally included. I'm a mom, I have 3 kids with disabilities. And one of the stories I share all the time is my middle daughter does Pathfinders. It's like guides or scouts. It's a sort of a recreation thing. And the best respite I've ever had is a weekend she went camping with her guide group and those sorts of opportunities. So I think if there's a big piece around as well, how are we helping guides, scouts, the YMCA, other really local based programs to be inclusive, because those are the meaningful ways in which people become attached to their communities. And what we're finding, again, through things like local area coordination that really look hyper local, make those links. People are authentically involved in their communities. They're safer as a result of those relationships. So I think that the more we can do to support people to build authentic relationships connected in their communities, we see those roles start to change and we see them become more attractive because it's the work that people really want to do anyways, that engaging work of making people have that impact, have that change and that inclusion in their lives. So I think it's a lot about helping service provider organizations think creatively to respond to this crisis and outside the box of the services that are sort of more typically being provided at times. And building good supports really starts with listening to what the person wants and what the person is envisioning for their life for inclusion. If we are looking to really make an impact, we have to be building person by person what matters to them. And that's going to change from individual to individual. I think we need to make sure we're involving self-advocates, and it's fantastic to have Inclusion International on this panel, and I'm more than happy to be here. I think the voice of a self-advocate who can really talk about why this matters, the difference it makes in their life, because we need all of these voices at the table, because we need to build together to build stronger and to build more inclusive. So I think my takeaway messages really would be around how are we building inclusive communities where people are authentically included? How are we thinking creatively so that we can address exactly the many issues that were already raised, so we can have people who are inspired and want to be part of a support role, who see that support role as fostering inclusion instead of following a set of compliance regulations. And how are we really building that authentic life for people? Because that's what's at the heart of this, is how do we build authentic inclusion for people? So those would be my suggestions. And again, really just pleased to be here and really welcome the comments that others have made that highlight some of these similar challenges. And I think the solution lies in all of us continuing to work together. So thanks for having us.
Thank you very much, Anna. I think for very clear, this could be like a vacancy notice for a job for one of our members, you know, building relationships, thinking locally, building communities, less bureaucracy, less regulation, more creativity. If we manage to put these in our vacancies for social workers, I'm sure we won't have that many difficulties in actually finding people who would be willing to do the job. The issue is that that's not the case right now in many situations. So it's definitely something to move forward for. And you also mentioned that we need to become, social workers need to become agents of change. And actually it's quite in sync with the ESPD paper from 2019 that we wrote, which was about staff issues, which was from care worker to enabler of change. So moving away from the traditional thinking of care, looking after people in an institution, towards becoming an enabler of change. And I think that's very much in line with what Anna was saying here. So it's great to see that our thinking is actually quite aligned over these matters. Now let's move to the European Commission, who are which is one of the institutions of the European Union, who are increasingly active over these topics. Olga de Briones, you are with us. The European Disability Rights Strategy and the Commission as a whole is increasingly considering the issue of staff shortages in terms of developing care and support systems. What does the EU do for member states to find solutions to these staff shortages? So what help do you provide to member states and services and so forth? Olga?
Hello. Yes, can you hear me correctly now?
Perfectly.
Fantastic. So thank you very much, and thank you for having the Commission to co-host this side event in an extremely timely, I would say, and topical issue, because indeed, as I've heard from the different speakers, it's a challenge that indeed we share in Europe with other parts of the world. Just to give a little bit of the policy background, so we have indeed the strategy, the strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities 2030, but which has a very focal point on implementing the right to independent living and community-based support. But access to services is actually a very important principle, social principle in the EU, and is a prominent principle in the European Pillar of Social Rights, with a standalone principle 17 on inclusion of persons with disabilities. But many of the principles of this social pillar, which is a little bit our compass in the EU for our social policies, talk and address the issue of accessing services of quality and services that are adapted to the needs of the persons. So it's a very important principle that indeed is reflected in the strategy. And next to and in the strategy, actually, as I was saying, we've put a reinforced focus on the right to independent living and inclusion in society. this focus is let's say, reflected in two flagship initiatives that we are working on. The first one, foreseen for this year, is actually guidance to member states with the aim of supporting better the movements and the transition that is ongoing in all member states from institutional type settings of care to community-based and person-centered approaches of quality services in the community. And with the guidance, we want to facilitate a little bit and advance and make faster progress, I would say, with the transition. And then these guidelines will be complemented next year with a framework of excellence for social services addressed to persons with disabilities, where indeed the issue of attractiveness of the sectors and the capacity building of workforce will be will take an important dimension in this framework. The thing is that quality, as we have heard today, and fully in this line, quality of services depends to a great extent on the workers themselves. And this is a focus that becomes very prominent in the more recent EU care strategy, which is another policy framework that has been adopted last year, putting a strong focus on the quality of the care sector for long-term care for persons in need of long-term care, with one of our instruments in the EU, which is of legal instrument, which is a council recommendation on access to high quality, affordable long-term care, which among other calls to member states, the call to ensure that long-term care is provided by skilled and competent workers with a decent wage and fair working conditions. So this is very much the dimensions that are in focus of our work for the coming years, and where we are indeed, as Thomas has said, setting a lot of attention. The objective is clear. We want to address the challenge of the long-term care sector and to pave the way to reap the huge job creation potential that Javier was mentioning, where we estimate that more than 1.6 million long-term care workers are needed by 2050. This is supported, of course, also by the demographics in Europe with an aging population, and also the movement of transformation that we are trying to accelerate, actually, and learn from each other. So I'm always very happy for these opportunities to hear how other colleagues from other parts of the world are advancing in this. I wanted to mention some concrete EU-level actions that we are looking at rolling out as part of this care strategy, the EU care strategy, and which are, I would say, in three key areas where the European Union gives continuous support in member states, and which is in the area of social policies, which is skills. So we want to launch, and this ESPD is as partners of this. We want to launch skills partnerships for the long-term care sector under what we call the Pact of Skills, which is an initiative under the skills agenda. And with the objective of training at least 60% of long-term care professionals every year, paid for or provided by the employers, and including on areas related to digitalization and person-centered care. We are then also reviewing the application of EU standards on working conditions in long-term care to identify potential challenges and gaps in the sector, and then provide policy guidance afterwards for the enforcement of EU labor law in the care sector. And it will be complemented later on by our Agency on Occupational Safety and Health, which will also carry out an overview of the situation on occupational safety and health in the sector. And then a third kind of strand of action is we are working to develop a new sectoral social dialogue on the long-term care sector and also support the capacity building for social dialogue at national level to really develop. It is a very important pillar in our social policies, to always be in constant dialogue and discussion and exchange with civil society, so as well disabled persons in our area, disabled person organization as service providers like EASPD, but also to develop the dialogue with the social partners. So to sit trade unions and employers organizations around the table to develop really the working conditions, and the job contents in the sector. Now, I will say also we are concluding talent partnerships with third countries, because the care sector, and given the dynamics also of demographics in our member states, many member states are finding it hard to find workers from their own workforce. So we are also looking at facilitating the movement, mobility in this sense, within and also with outside third partners. So we are working on concluding talent partnerships with third countries and set up a new talent pool to facilitate the matching between the employers and skilled third country nationals. And next to this, but I will be very briefly, because it's another dimension, we are mobilizing also funding support. This is an important role also, an important support to member states. We have structural funds, notably the European Social Fund is the main instrument in the EU for capital, for human capital, for investing in human capital. But we have other funds, like for example, the Erasmus Plus programs. These are really focusing on skills, on the packs of skills, of blueprints for sectoral cooperation, which are really tools to develop new profiles and new professions and make this advance. So I think I will stop here, and I'm very happy to take questions if anything was not clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga. Quite a clear presentation of, well, a very clear presentation of what the European Commission is doing. Primarily, the European Commission doesn't have really competence over the development of long-term care or social support systems. That lies in Europe primarily at national level, sometimes also at regional level, depending a bit on the countries. But the Commission is still very active to try and support those discussions at national level and play a complementary role to these developments. So there's a lot going on, really. Great. Now we've finished the round of speakers, and we can sort of open it up for, I think, around a quarter of an hour of discussions with other participants. Are there any questions or comments from other participants in this meeting? Okay, a question from Fabrizio. Fabrizio?
Yes, thank you, Thomas. But it's not really a question. It's just maybe a comment, or maybe to underline what the reality is. Because what I see, I have a rehabilitation center for persons with disabilities in Rome, and every time I have to search for the persons that work in my center is always very, very difficult. The main reasons is of this low recruitment. It's because the collective income it's in the whole country is quite it's quite few. It's not such a rich income, and career is also quite low. So at the end, we become not so attractive. So it's a bit difficult to find persons that could be supporting persons for persons with disabilities in our centers. As soon as they find a better place in the public sector, they prefer, because they are more sure to keep it maybe for the whole life. And the same problem is we face it exactly in education with the supporting teachers. It's exactly the same. Career, very few, not so well recognized. And so all these things make a big problem when we look for persons to support persons with disabilities in our centers. That's That's what I wanted to point out, because this is a big gap that we face every time. So it's really very difficult to keep also people in the job. Thank you.
Thank you, Fabrizio. Maybe a quick answer. Does anyone want to come in around these issues? Maybe Donna, what solutions are you finding at ANCOR around wages and working conditions?
That's a great question. We have a few pathways that we're working on and that we're focused on. I don't believe there's a single silver bullet, but some of the work that we're doing is certainly with Congress. We are supporting and actively pursuing an increase to the federal medical assistance program. That's the federal component that helps fund the activity at the state level. As you can imagine, there's not a tremendous amount of support for that. We don't necessarily expect that a bill involving that will move forward in this Congress. But from a messaging and information perspective, we feel it's important to talk about the depressed rates that are paid to providers that subsequently roll to direct support professionals. The other thing that we're doing that we think has great potential to move forward this year is the creation of what's called a standard occupational classification for our direct support professionals. And that is a classification that's deemed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And we feel that this is really important because it would create a federal definition of direct support staff, which currently does not exist. We are generally lumped into an array of other health and human service categories, and we believe that it's essential to moving toward a professionalization of this workforce to better understand the trends and the impact that this workforce has. What are our numbers? What's our turnover? What do the average wages look like? Much of this information we currently cull from different sources and pull together sort of an amalgam of data. We think it's really important that there be a federal designation to help solidify that data. And then the third thing that we're really focusing on is creating a pipeline for direct support staff, helping to create a career pathway. There are a number of other entities in the US that are also working on this. For example, we have our National Association of Direct Support Professionals. They have a certification process with 3 levels of certification. It's all voluntary, but some states are using it in its entirety. Others have like subgroupings that are pursuing it. Individual providers may be using it. And so we feel that to more broadly create this professionalization of the direct support workforce would be beneficial.
Very clear. Thank you, Donna. So wages, classification around direct support jobs, and a pipeline with career pathways is the process in that from ANCOR. Okay, thank you. Rashid, you've raised your hand. If you could come in.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to share an observation. And recently I was having this discussion with an organization and their team about, they shared that they're doing almost everything right to retain their staff, but what's going wrong? And I said, what all are you doing there? Like, we're giving sign-on bonuses. We're providing education, higher education, and we're paying for that. We're giving all the additional perks that we can. And I said, how much is your average wage that you're giving? And they said it's about $18 to $23. And I said, what's the average rent? So I think after we drilled and brainstormed a lot, one of the key factors that was impacting their high attrition rate was the cost of living in that area overall, which was super high post-COVID. And the rent for a studio apartment was equivalent to almost 80% of the DSP salary. So for a lot of people who had single source of income and just themselves and not having a family to support that shared income, they had to pay 80% rent, which of course they wouldn't. So they were living far, far away in remote and countryside areas or on the outskirts and traveling back and forth every day. So we said, how about we look at subsidized housing? So they said with the wages that they are paid, they don't even qualify for that subsidized housing with the state. And some of them who do qualify are in a long wait list. So they have to wait like forever to clear that waiting list. So I don't know, it all comes down to funding at the end. That can be, probably rent a building, and if you're hiring people, we offer them either subsidized or free housing as part of the benefit. So just a thought that I would like to share. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rashid. I think that's a common point across both in North America, but also in Europe. Cost of living is increasing, housing is increasing, it's becoming very difficult to live. And of course, you can want to be a social worker, but you also need to feed your family. And so if those two don't align, then you're not going to do, or there's a risk that you won't be doing the job. So thank you, Rashid, for that. I don't know if anyone wants to come in response to that.
I'd be happy to just add a follow along to echo on. So Rachid, it's so nice to see you here. And I think your comments were completely on point, and the same as Thomas said, US, Europe, India, it's something we're all facing. And we at Keystone have employed even things like tuition reimbursement as a benefit that we have now. And the career pathways is something that we're trying to work on. These are strengthening. These are all really critical pieces. What we have a focus on developing our frontline and middle managers, because direct support professionals, if they're not supported and feeling the support well, especially for working on mitigating some of the risk aversion and in the work that is true inclusion work, collaboratively with the people who accept our supports, managers need to really be there alongside. But I think at Keystone, we really try to function with the mindset that a direct support professional, that someone in a support professional role is the community bridge builder, and that we've seen, if we had more time, I would love to share a story, but there's so many poignant examples of the money as a critical piece, and it has to be prioritized. But if people also don't feel the value in their job, or feel better about the work that they're doing and see the role as truly critically important and valued, the mindset shift really can change the perspective on job satisfaction. So thank you for your points and allowing me some time to add on.
Thank you very much. Bob, you want to come in? You have a few minutes, because we need to close in a few minutes, so not too long, please.
Okay, I'll try not to be too frightening, Thomas. I was delighted to hear Inclusion International's contribution. It seems to me that we carry on as if we're going to be the solution to everything, and we actually operate within a system. And we certainly in real terms in the UK and in other places that we've worked in the world, the system is preoccupied with buying solutions to everything. So services are the solution to everything. I wrote a book called Much More to Life Than Services in 2010. Nothing has changed since then, really. It seems to me that we have to deal realistically with sustainable social policy and sustainable solutions. And part of the reason that we can't pay staff properly to do the jobs that are so clearly needing to be done is because of we haven't invested in our communities. Very straightforwardly, within the UK, localised social services quite deliberately were taken apart during the 80s and 90s as a part of social policy. And it was a social policy based on the assumption that everything could be dealt with through commodification of care. So as I say, I can carry on at great length, and I'm not going to. But essentially, if we start off with what Inclusion International was saying, and what we and so many other organisations that actively, struggle to support people that have great lives, have been saying for a very long time, then we need to find total societal solutions, and we need to get away from the notion that everything is about money. If we spent the money that we are currently spending in a more focused way, if we spent the money that we are currently misspending, in my view, in strengthening families, communities, and citizens, then and that means enabling people, as they've done for millennia, to have more time and a greater investment in caring for each other, then we might actually start to sort this out. But we're not going to sort it out by throwing more and more money at it. And we're all going to, as we've heard today, we're all going to struggle in our own ways to do our very, very best to support the people we care about, and the people we're often funded to support. But the solutions actually are systemic, and we need to be really alive to that.
Thank you, Bob. I think there's a lot for us to align on there. I will now be concluding this session because it's only an hour and a quarter, so I will be concluding the session. Effectively, the main message that I take out of this discussion is that transitioning to the UN Convention and the principles of the UN Convention can help to create more attractive jobs. Effectively, because, and I won't repeat exactly what Anna from Inclusion International said, but it's about creating authentic relationships, thinking locally, building local communities, having less bureaucratic jobs, and more becoming agents of change and showing your creativity. These are the ways to create more attractive jobs. Then effectively, we also need to look into, of course, improving wages, improving working conditions, providing career paths. These are all elements that can be done. But I'm not sure that we will get there unless we make this shift to independent living or interdependent living and so forth. If we continue using outdated models, then of course public authorities are not really willing to subsidize it because they don't really think it works that much. If we can showcase that community living works, if we can showcase that we can create authentic, real, good lives for people through these types of services, then perhaps public authorities will be willing to put in either the same amount of money or more money to be able to make that happen. And as a result, be able to increase the wages. So I'm not sure. I think that on the short term, the UN Convention principles can create attractive jobs. On the long term, it could also maybe show a way to improving wages and working conditions in the sector, which rely a lot on public funding, because effectively our services will be more impactful, and that will come with hopefully more political support. So I'm just trying to summarize a little bit those discussions. For ESPD, this will be a little bit the beginning of exploring further around these hypotheses. We'll of course continue to work on our side with Olga and the European Commission in many of the areas that she talked about today. And hopefully we can also work with Inclusion International, with ANCOR, with Keystone, and everyone else who's interested to really see and explore to which extent this transformation can actually also help to solve our staff-related challenges. So I'd like to thank everyone